you guys? Michael Streight with the Proper Form Podcast. Excited for this episode today. Honestly, Nick and I don't know each other too well yet, but I'm excited to continue to get to know Nick more through this episode and even more before and after this. But Nick Surface is here with me today with the Impossible Life Podcast. Did I say that correct?
You did, yeah.
Okay. And we actually saw each other literally in passing over in Prosper, Texas at like a salon suite barbershop place.
Yeah.
And he had the Impossible Life podcast, like sweatshirt on with the bright green, and me just being nosy and not afraid to, talk to a wall if I'm interested in it. And I was like, hey man, what's that? What's your sweatshirt about? And then we ended up connecting on social media, and I saw a lot of what they're doing and just aligned with a lot of, I was like, I want to get to know this guy.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, man. That was not a normal, my barber's in there and I always get my hair cut. That was not a normal day. It was a good day. I bumped you. I was like, man, that was kind of, God appointment there to just bump into somebody. So yeah, it was, I'm glad our paths crossed. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. We ended up exchanging information, I think, or something, and following each other on social media. And then, obviously I'm in this space trying to do podcasts in person and continue to build a guest list. And I was like, man, this guy would be awesome to have here.
Thanks, man.
And just get to know. So thank you. Yeah. So dude, you shared a little bit before we kind of got started, but I want to hear a little bit more about the Impossible Life podcast, about you and Garrett, y'all's backgrounds. But one of the things you guys say, kind of purpose within the Impossible Life podcast, that it exists to unleash men and women to live to live fearless lives full of purpose as God made them to be.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate more on kind of where that stemmed from, and like where did the heart for the Impossible Life come from?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you a little bit of our origin story.
Yeah.
So, Garrett, my podcast co-host is Garrett Unkelbach, and he's a former Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
And so the way that I came into contact with Garrett was I moved out here in early in the COVID timeline from 2020. I came out to Dallas from San Diego, California. And I ended up getting plugged into a church called Elevate Life Church, where we're still plugged in. And Garrett was just starting to lead the men's ministry there. So, I went in there and I was, at the time, I wasn't really serving God. I was I'd been depressed. I spent 6 years of my life depressed, and I was, that had been a few years in the past at this point, but it was still I was still unpacking and carrying a lot of the baggage from that, which I didn't know.
Wow.
But so I see this guy and he's this Navy SEAL, and they're like, oh, everybody's like, oh, he's a Navy SEAL. And I'm kind of like, okay. I'm like, well, what else is he? You know what I mean? And that was my attitude, which is a little bit dishonoring and disrespectful, if I'm being honest. But that was the truth. And so as I was around this guy, I started observing him more. And one of the things, I've always been a watcher of people. Like, I like to pick up and learn from people, whether they're trying to teach me or not. I think that I'm a lifelong learner. And so one of the things that I always look to do is to learn all the time from people in every circumstance that I'm in. So I watched Garrett for a while, and I was like, man, this guy lives, like I said, I didn't care that he was a Navy SEAL. That did not get me the massive seal of respect, even though I was from San Diego where the SEALs train. I watched him. I was like, man, this guy really lives fearlessly. And that was one thing I knew I did not do, was live fearlessly. So I was like, okay. So I got in touch with Garrett, and I asked him to start coaching me. So he started coaching me, and we got along really, really well. And so one day I was listening to another podcast that I really love, and he was giving people advice on how to be happy. And I was listening. I was like, man, this guy should not be giving people advice on how to be happy. He's, had a lot of difficulties and still has a melancholy to his life that I didn't think was really what you'd want to imitate. And I was like, I know somebody who should be giving advice. And so I just text Garrett. I feel like it was, honestly, I can remember where it was. I was running in the park in front of my house. I feel like it was a real God moment where you just get one of those ideas in your head that's so loud. You're like, it almost feels like someone else put the idea in there. Yeah. And so I texted him. I said, hey, would you be willing to do this? And he was like, well, it's a lot of work. And I was like, look, I'll do everything. You just got to turn up at an appointed place and time, and we'll go. So he's like, all right, check. So that was 3.5 years ago, man. And we're 185 episodes in now. The average podcast, as we were talking about beforehand, only lasts 6 episodes. And it's been awesome, man. We've built, I'm very proud. We're a top 50 podcast in Spotify in the religion and spirituality space.
That's amazing.
And we focus very much on like practical application of wisdom, living truly in line with God's design.
Yes.
I think a lot of times, like the vision of the Impossible Life is to shift the perception of what it means to be a godly man. And what that means for us is, I grew up in a lot of, in Christianity and in church, and a lot of times it was like the Christian guy was like the busted up fat dude in his khakis who drove a beat up station wagon and was kind of just getting by in life. And that was my perception of Christianity. A lot of growing up was it's kind of like, oh, well, we made it through the week. Praise God. And it just bothered me. It just really bothered me. And so in Garrett and in what we have at Elevate Life Church, where I still go, I realized I was like, there's a whole different, there's a whole different side of following after God, where it's like when you start to understand God's ways and His wisdom, you can apply those things and you can win. And so that's what a lot of what we cover is just showing how to practically apply the wisdom of God in your life. And when I say win, I don't mean that everything gets easy and everything goes right and it all goes your way. I mean win in the sense that you can count it all joy, like the Apostle Paul says, you can count it all joy whenever you're in difficult circumstances. So that's where that comes from. We have the original, the Great Commission, which is be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and take dominion, right? And I believe that was the very first thing that God commanded humanity to do, and that still applies, right? Yeah. It's not like that disappeared. We all know the Great Commission, which is go into all the world and make disciples, and that applies as well. But when we say what you read there about the podcast, very much believe that men and women, and our heart is for men, but we have a lot of women that listen to us as well. But like God has a commission for people, the Great Commandment, I think it is, where He talks about be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and so we're about that, about understanding God's ways and bringing God's ways into everything that you do. That one of my life scriptures, and I'll be quiet here, but one of my life scriptures is Proverbs 3:5-6, which is trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not in your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him and He'll direct your path. And that's really like an unlock for purpose, because so often where we fall down on things is we're like, man, I trust you, God, but I really need to know how this is going to work out. Yeah. And it's like, you're not guaranteed. Not only are you not guaranteed certainty, I can guarantee you uncertainty. You're going to see purpose when you look back. But if you can truly submit your heart to God and lay it down and allow yourself to trust Him, and that means it's not like, oh, but if you could fix this first, then I could focus on what you want. It's like, no, God, I trust you. Okay, so now in all your ways acknowledge Him. What does that mean? What does God say about marriage? What does God say about my mindset? What does God say about the way that I steward my body, my kids, how I should be at my job, how I bring justice and bring His ways into every single thing that I do? In all your ways acknowledge Him, and then what happens? He directs your paths. AKA, God's going to take care of the purpose in your life. You don't have to sit there and know what it is or be like, well, this is my purpose. You just need to honor God and be faithful with what you got, and He's going to make it work out for you. And so that's in line with our whole thinking, and that's why we exist. And praise God, like I said, we've been doing this for 3.5 years now. To see some of the messages that we get on email and the comments we get, it's so humbling, man, to just see how God's honored what we've done, and continue to do, to be able to help impact people, which is really what we care about.
Yeah. So, dude, wow.
Long answer to a short question.
Let's go. Yeah, drop the mic.
Yeah.
I think that's really good. I love the purpose and God. I was literally listening to a podcast yesterday. A guy named Quinda has Faith Hustle.
Okay.
Amazing podcast. You should check it out.
Yeah.
Shout out to the Faith Hustle crew. And it's in bringing God into business and entrepreneurship. And he had a great entrepreneur on there, and they were talking about sitting in the car and having the car in park and the hands on the steering wheel. I'm like, God, just guide me and lead me. And it's like, well, kind of got to put it in drive,
for sure,
right? So going back to everything you just said, we've got to put action into the life that God's given us here on earth, but then trusting in the guidance that He's going to give us through that.
Yeah. And that's where people fall down, is it's always like our desire to need control and certainty and to know what's going to happen, where our understanding in our heart. Yeah. It's like, hey, God, if you could tell me how this is going to work out, then of course I'm going to be obedient.
Yes.
And it's like, no, you trust that I'm God, and I will, we all love to quote Romans 8:28, which is He makes all things work together for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. Well, one of the challenges with His definition of good and our definition of good is they're very different.
Yeah.
Right. And if we don't see it in the moment, we're like, well, this can't be God. And it's like, it's not over yet. Right. The story isn't over yet.
Yeah.
Good is you being shaped and conformed into the image of Jesus Christ. Good is you maturing. And if, there's this great reel that's going around right now of Alex Hormozy. And he said, if you wanted to make a strong kid, would you give them an easy life? Or do you think that you would give them some difficulty? If you wanted to make them tough, would you have things all go their way? Or would you have things fail and break so that they have to figure it out? I mean, we all know the answer to that. But then whenever it's like we have this weird expectation of wanting everything to be easy and smooth road, and it's like, I think God's a lot more interested in who you're becoming than what you're doing. Whereas,
Yep.
we have this big American idea of like what we're doing is who we are, and that's
Yeah.
absolutely false. So,
Yeah, the vision I kinda get and love is, like, the ice sculpture, the
right,
sculpting of, like, man, just it's I can s if I wanna sculpt something out of ice, it's just a big square block, but
right,
I could see a bird or
right.
a penguin or whatever it is that I wanna
Yeah,
sculpt, but I have to chip away at it
yeah,
to make it actual come to life and fall into, like, its purpose and what it's meant to be,
yeah,
and in ways like God's calling us to, like, He's chipping away. We gotta
yeah.
keep grinding and moving and creating that friction for His and hope for the good that He's gonna, align it with His purpose,
Yeah, there's
what
a
He wants.
wonderful quote you'll like based on what you just said. So Michelangelo, whenever he sculpted David,
Yeah,
I think he was like the third or fourth person that tried to do it. Lots of people had tried to like sculpt this particular lump of granite or whatever it was, or
yeah,
marble. I'm getting it wrong for the actual type, but the rock. And so he finally, he sat there and looked at it for a long time, and then he went in there, and of course he carved one of the greatest, most famous statues of all
yeah,
time in David. And they asked him, like, they asked him about it, and he said he just removed everything that wasn't David
yes,
because he had such a clear picture of who David was.
yes.
And I love that. I think that that's like such a great analogy for what you just described.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. That is so good. Well, I want to before we get on some other topics I want to discuss that we had even talked to before about this, but I love on the intro and I think you kind of probably elaborate on this a little bit. You guys mentioned what you guys know is that nothing is impossible. So
Yeah.
instead of using that as an excuse not to try, you use it as the pursuit. You use the pursuit of impossible as an accelerant for greatness.
Yeah.
You then go on to say the solution to any impossible task start with this question: if I had to, what would it take?
Yeah.
Like what's how did you come up with the if I had to, what would it take? Like were you envisioning like, this
Yeah.
wall that I've got to climb and overcome it like
Yeah, I think so. So much of what we talk about in the Impossible Life podcast is mindset, right? We talk a lot about the way you think, whether you're a Christian or not. Like the way that you think is impacting everything in your life. I really love cognitive behavioral therapy and neurolinguistic programming. Like I'm a
yeah.
little bit of a psychology nerd, so I could go into that more, but I won't.
Okay.
But I will tell you that the world inside your head is what dictates everything you see, regardless of your circumstances.
Mm.
There's some great quotes out there, like Viktor Frankl, if you know him from Man's Search for Meaning. He was an Auschwitz survivor, right? So he goes to the worst concentration camp there is, and he has this great quote. He says, "The last of the human freedoms is one's ability to pick, choose their own attitude in any given circumstance." And he talks about between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space lies your choice, and in that choice lies your freedom. What does that tell you? This is a guy who's gone through the worst thing that most of us could imagine. He lost his wife. He
Yeah.
lost all his life's work. He was a doctor, just absolutely destroyed with nothing left. And he's in there going, you know what? But every day I still had a choice. Most people would be like, I'm miserable. This is awful. And
Yeah.
I hate my life. And this guy's telling you about like, hey, you can choose even in those circumstances, which to me is testing at the extreme.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about the way that you think and the thought process of impossible. A lot of times what we call impossible is just the first inconvenience,
Mm.
right? Like most people want to quit at the first point of inconvenience,
Yes.
and we give up so easily. And I mean, obviously Garrett's such a blessing to me because he's tested these things at the extreme of
Yeah.
being, I mean, if you know anything about Bud's training for the Navy
Yeah.
SEALs, there's an 80% attrition rate. It's just incredible. I mean, it just Bud's alone. It has 3 phases, and they're just people are getting rolled, they're getting hurt, they're
Yeah.
getting disqualified. Most of them are quitting.
Yeah.
It's very difficult just to get through that. And so he's tested these things, and that thought process of if I had to, what would I take what would it take is very much from him. And it's that thought process of like, in order to start pursuing something impossible, you have to first believe you can, right? There's great quotes that say it's only impossible until somebody does it, right? And
Yep.
I think that's attributed to Batman, which,
Yep.
who doesn't want to have a quote from Batman? But it's that thought process of like, if you want to start doing the impossible, you got to believe you got to believe you can.
Yeah.
So that's a question that opens up possibility. Oh, I can't, no one can do it. It's impossible. Well, if you had to, what would it take? Well, because think about it.
Starts to bridge that
Right.
gap.
Hey, I need
Yeah.
you to move that mountain. Pff, it's impossible. Well, if you had to, what would you take? Well, I would take an atom bomb and I'd blow it into a bunch of, million pieces, and then I would get a bunch of construction trucks. Great. You just moved the mountain.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's not impossible. You just thought that because it wasn't something that you saw an easy solution to, it's impossible. It's not impossible. Now, maybe it costs more than you're willing to pay,
Yeah.
but it's still possible. And so it's
Yeah.
that thought process.
Yeah, there's a entrepreneur I follow in Houston, and he's early 30s has built a lot of successful companies. And one of kind of his jokes with when coming with friction and crazy things that happen in world and entrepreneurship is with more money and a positive attitude, anything's
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, but it's
It might
true.
take more time, it
Right.
might take more money, it might
Yeah.
take more blood, sweat, tears,
Yeah.
but is there a possibility that it could actually become possible?
Yeah. Belief is such a powerful
Yeah,
thing. We're all being driven by our beliefs all the time.
yeah,
And a lot of us don't know it because our beliefs, our core beliefs are deep inside our subconscious,
mm,
dictating the way we see the world and how we interpret information. But like when you can tap into the power of belief and you understand it, it's it's a force for sure.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Man, I love that. So a few of the other topics we kind of switch a little bit that you had discussed, and you even kind of maybe mentioned a little bit of your story with
Yeah,
some of the depression and
for
maybe
sure.
align with some of the anxiety, but overcoming depression, excuse me, overcoming anxiety, and then depression and intentional life designed to win in all areas of life. I'd love for you to touch on those two, and then
Yeah.
we'll come back to the last one.
Yeah, I mean, so I just, rewind on my story a little bit. I mean, if you
Okay.
rewind 12 plus years ago, probably about 14 years at this point, man, I was still depressed, man. I was very depressed, didn't have any idea where I was going, a lot of anxiety, just real dissatisfaction. If anyone's ever struggled with depression, they'll know what this means. When you wake up every day and it just feels like Groundhog Day and nothing excites you. I'm talking about like pick
Mm,
your best Saturday. You've got a concert to go to, you're playing your favorite sport, you're doing whatever it is that you love.
yeah.
And even then you're like, whatever. Like that was basically my existence for 6 years. And the only time I ever felt anything was when I drank. And I hated it. I hated
Mm,
it. Ironically, or I shouldn't say ironically, because I don't know if it's the literal definition of irony, but like the reason I felt so depressed was because I felt like I had no purpose. So it was actually my strong desire and pull for purpose that I grew up with because I grew up in a Christian household.
yeah.
My parents told me God had a plan for my life, and like I believed it, man. I remember at a young age looking up at the stars and being like, I know, like I'm meant for something, man. This is
Yeah.
not just like I'm not just like here to die and maybe consume a little bit of things in between and have some fun. Like there's something more for my life. Went to Bible college in my early 20s, which is where I met my wife, and
Mm,
I lived over in the UK for 9 years, and
wow.
that's whenever I fell into depression, just because I so much of my idea of how it would go didn't line up.
Yeah.
And that was very disappointing. So, like, expectations not met combined with very difficult circumstances financially. And it's a pretty cold culture over there in the UK,
Yeah.
combined with some just very unintentional alignments. And what I mean by that is I just hung out with whoever I hung out with. And, one of the best pieces of advice you can ever get and you can ever give is that you will become like the people you hang around with, right?
Yeah.
Everyone loves the Jim Rohn quote, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So choose, and then I think Tim Ferriss added choose wisely, which is logical. But it's really important. And I had no real understanding of that. So I just hung out with whoever was around, which was the people I worked with. And so, guess what they did? They drank and they partied and they did, all the stuff that you would expect someone to do. And I was just kind of like, okay. So I was around that and just also adopted a lot of their thinking, which was not a very hopeful,
Mm,
optimistic, growth-minded way of thinking.
yeah.
And in the process of that, like lost my faith as well. Just, never could say I didn't believe in God, but definitely walked away from Christianity and was just like, yeah, that's just a religion, whatever. Because they have a historical view of Christianity over there. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
To them, Christianity is part of history, which if you know
Mm,
church history and
yeah.
some of those things, you can understand why, because they played, England played a large part in
Yeah.
shaping things, such as the New King James Version and all that sort of stuff of translation of the Bible is thanks to England. But anyways, so I say all that long background there, but so I climbed my way out of that, right? And I realized that I still have a lot of anxiety, and I could go into how to climb out of depression, but that's something else. But like with anxiety, one of the things about anxiety is it's always future based, right? And if you want to sum up anxiety, it's I don't know what to do. So all your anxiety boils down to being future focused on a scenario that hasn't happened but could happen, and if it did happen, you don't know what to do. So you're going to go ahead and take ownership of those feelings of panic now for something that hasn't happened. So it's like you want to pay the cost of
Mm,
something at least twice if it does happen. And here's the thing: there's a
mm,
great quote from Mark Twain that says, "In my life, I've known a great deal of worry, most of which never came true." And it's like,
yes.
how many times are we sitting there like future focused like on those things, going, "Man, oh, if this happens, what am I?" Well, here's a great thing: the more prepared you are, and this is something that I've gotten to witness with Garrett, the more prepared you are, the less you're going to feel anxious about things, right? If anxiety is I don't know what to do, anxiety, peace would be I know exactly what I'm going to do. And here's the thing: you don't know what you're going to do if it happens. So how can you have peace? Well, you can decide who you're going to be in the circumstance, no matter what, right? And this is what happens when you become a core values based person. When you have core values and you understand that that's core values is you saying this is what matters most to me. This is what I value, and this is how I bring value. When you have those core values, you can live a core values based life. So you're like, I know who I'm going to be no matter what, and that's where you'll get peace is from understanding. Look, if the worst comes, I said, for example, mine are grow, connect, faith, dream, and serve. Those are my 5 core values. So like, if the world crumbles tomorrow, if everything goes wrong in my business, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have faith in God. I'm still going to push myself to grow. I'm going to connect with other people. I'm going to serve them, and I'm going to dream of big things, no matter what.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds really simple. It's simple, not easy, but I will tell you there's a lot more to it. But that's like when you start to understand, like I said, God's more interested in who you're becoming than he is about what you're doing. Because if he really wants something done, as we've seen, he can just do it himself. Like God doesn't need our help, right? And that's a real release for us. So, but he's very interested in who we're becoming. That's I could go more on that, but that's probably about it.
And that part does that tie in a little bit to just also the depression piece and the intentional life design to win in the areas of life. Like, does that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. If we're a very busy society, right? In America, we book our schedules from sun up to sundown.
Yes.
And another way to think of that is that you're carrying weight, right? Like weight is responsibility. I remember when I was in my early 30s and I was just having kids, starting to have kids, it was like, oh man, like these kids all depend on me. My wife stays home. She depends on me. Like I've got all these bills. What if this happened? I've got like, everyone's pulling on me. And like, you can really start to be like, man, like, anxiety can creep in and all this, you can start to play out the scenarios. And guess what? What you just said is true, right? Like you are responsible. Well, there's a great analogy for us to see, and it's bridges. What do bridges do? They carry weight. And how do they do it? They're engineered. They have structures, right? So the stronger your structure is, the more weight you're going to be able to carry.
Yeah.
So I was like a very easygoing, free-loving, like grew up in Southern California, just want to surf and take it easy type of guy. But as I've grown up, I've realized like that doesn't work very well, because then anytime something's uncomfortable or inconvenient, you're like, it really puts you out of shape.
Yep.
So there's the structures of your life, and being able to be intentional in the design of your life means that you know what matters most. You know what your priorities are, and you live according to them. And so you structure your life so that you can do that. And that sounds really, that's a very high level way of putting it. But like I'm talking down to, I think one of the things that people manage the worst is time, right? It's what we want the most and what we use the worst. And if you actually start to get your head around how you manage your time and really look at the patterns in your life, one of the greatest gifts we have is to be able to recognize patterns, right? Like we all know that it's going to be a day tomorrow. Sun's going to go down tonight. It's going to come back up tomorrow. No one questions that. That's a small pattern that we all know about.
We can even get it down to almost the exact minute.
We can. And then we know the seasons and all these things, right? Like, so we have so many patterns that we take for granted, but there's patterns in your life that are happening all the time. There's things that make you, eat food that you shouldn't. Right. There's things that happen that are going to trigger a certain emotion in you, or trigger a certain like playbook in your head. And the more you can start to develop and realize that these patterns are going on in your life, and not only just see them, but then also prepare for what you're going to do when certain things come, you're not surprised. I think like 99% of the stuff that happens to us that throws us off track is stuff that we should be able to see coming if we're really paying attention, because our life, there's a rhythm to our life. And when you pick up on that and you see that, you can start to build intentional structures and patterns in all areas. And there's a lot of them, but like that's a very kind of high level way of
I mean, I know not necessarily talking about temptation, but what came to mind is like 1 Corinthians 10:13, right? Like being prepared, God provides a way out. But even just in the sense, like I've been a part of a more recent awesome men's group, like tying more into like even just like emotion of authors throughout the Bible. What emotion are they feeling? What's like the present feel that they have? And just tying that to like to us as men. This is obviously men's group, but about our emotions and like what are we feeling now? Because going back to just the anxiety and the depression of we're always kind of sometimes living very more so in the future, but also in the past, rather than like, man, where am I right now?
Yeah.
And that even ties into a lot of what you're saying of connecting into being intentional with the time that we have. How are we using it? What emotions are we pulling in or pulling out of the things and the playbooks and whatnot that come through our mind, and being able to be prepared for those.
Yeah, because your emotions are like a lens, right? If it's like you can look at a lemon, if you put on some blue glasses, what color is the lemon?
Yeah, is it green?
Oh no, it's
Blue?
still yellow, but it looks green to you.
Yeah.
And that's the whole
Okay,
point.
yes.
And that's what emotions do, is they color things in a way that is actually not real. Your emotions are a horrible compass. They're a wonderful indicator. Your emotions will give you clues as to what you're thinking and your core beliefs are underlying it.
Yeah.
But most people just follow their emotions around. I mean, sports fans are some of the worst ones in the world for this. And I'm a huge sports guy, so I always use that as an example because I've been there. It's like, if you want to see how foolish you can be, just look at some of the sports reels out there of people breaking their TVs and losing
Going
their mind.
crazy.
Yeah, because they're so
Yeah.
caught up in a moment. And that's like the hallmark of following your emotions, is like
Yeah.
you're caught in short-term mode, and you only see it the color that you do, and it's just a horrible way to live.
Yeah.
You will not do wise things if you are led by your emotions. That's for
so
sure.
good. And honestly, like a trick question, and I fell for it.
Yeah, well, hey, that's good that you did. Yeah, it helped, right? Yeah.
But seriously, like, yes, that definitely, I mean, you dumb that down into like a very easy way to understand of the lens of emotion. That's good.
Yeah, and like, I'm not like a bury your emotions guy by any stretch of the imagination. I think you got to understand, like, God made us with emotion for a reason, but you don't want to follow them, right? Like, and that's the difference, is like, you need to be, emotional intelligence and awareness is a really important skill to have. And also you can also learn to navigate and generate, the emotions that that you want, which is an amazing thing. But that's a whole nother.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's a whole nother podcast.
It's a whole other topic. Yeah.
That's great. Well, man, the other one was the power of self-leadership.
Yeah. Man, every reel that you've seen of insert, Jocko Willink, David Goggins, whoever it is that you love, like, and they're just talking about, I get up and I train and I do this and I train. You don't feel like it? I train. That is self-leadership, right? Self-leadership is being able to lead yourself to do what you know to be done, needs to be done, how it needs to be done, when it needs to be done, regardless of how you feel.
You tie in kind of, you might even talk about it, just what's the difference between motivation and discipline?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, the difference between motivation and discipline is that discipline's like a muscle, whereas motivation is like a fuel source, right? Muscles get stronger, fuel sources can go cold. So, right, there's lots of different sources of motivation, right? And most people are motivated by two things. They're either motivated by pain or by pleasure. And the problem with that is that you can get far enough or get enough of those things that you don't want anymore. So, like, let's say, like, I've been broke before, man. And when you're broke, you know what you want? To not be broke. Man, you want to, like, you will do anything to not be broke. And so, you say, a lot of people are like, man, I want to be a billionaire. Here's the truth. I think a lot of people, if they started down the path to being a billionaire, they'd probably stop after they made a couple million, because what you wanted was to not be broke. You wanted to be able to do whatever you wanted with your money. And then whenever you got enough of that, you were motivated by pain. You got far enough from the pain that you weren't broke. And it's like, well, I want the pleasure of the money. And then you got enough of it and you didn't want it anymore, because those things run out. What the best fuel source is purpose, because purpose is, the more you get of it, the more you want of it. And that's a motivating source that's far beyond. And purpose is really only comes from God. I mean, God, we can give purpose in its simplest form. Purpose is just, why am I doing this? But when you have purpose, that's eternal purpose that comes from the Creator, that's whenever you will go way further beyond yourself. You'll do things that you didn't think was possible. You'll keep going whenever it hurts, and it's because purpose pulls you forward, right? It's not something that you're just that's pushing you; it's pulling you, and that's very different.
You're not doing it for the exchange or to equal the equation of pain or pleasure.
Correct. Yeah, it's not input output; it's a transformational thing. So
that's good.
Yeah. But discipline's a muscle, like you were saying. I mean, you asked about discipline. Discipline's a muscle. It builds confidence. The more you do things, the more disciplined you get, the more confident you become, right? Because you can start to say, hey, I've done this, I've done that. You can remind yourself of some of the times when you've done whatever needed to be done, and you grow in your discipline. But self-leadership is a little bit different. Like, discipline is a part of self-leadership. But to me, self-leadership is having, first of all, a clear understanding of who you want to become and who God's made you to be. There's a lot that goes into it. Garrett and I actually do this thing called Ideal You, which is like this tool that we've developed together, where it's basically like vision casting for yourself. And I think a lot of people, we don't always stop and take stock of like who we are and who we're becoming. It's kind of like, if you're on default mode, which most of us are, you're just sort of like, well, these are my parents and this is where I came from. And, I'm just trying to do the best I can. And, I hope I do better than my parents, and I hope my kids turn out well. And, we have a lot of things I'm going to do the best I can. And that's sort of the thought process. Right.
Mm.
And there's some, that's a somewhat noble approach to try and do good and to try and do things that way. But when you can get a lot more intentional and understand the power of clarity, whenever you have a clear vision of who you want to become, in my phone, I have my ideal me statement. It describes exactly who I want to be in every arena. When I say arena, it's who I want to be as a man. So I want to be as a follower of God, as a leader, as a husband, as a father, as a friend, and as a son and as a brother, like all these different things, as a businessman. Like it's what I see for who I'm becoming. And that's whenever it's like self-leadership kicks in, because now you have the burden of backup, I should say, whenever you come into those times, because we all don't feel like doing stuff, right?
Yeah.
But when you've got a really clear vision and you can see exactly what you want for your marriage, I want to be I want to be in love with my wife, be connected. I want to value her, and I want her to know that I want to be a doting husband. Like I want her to know that she's the most important person in the world to me, and I want to have the kind of marriage that other people can model themselves after, first and foremost with my kids. I don't want my kids to have to like figure out all the junk that me and my wife never figured out. I want them to be able to be like, man, our parents were a great example of marriage. If we just do what they did, it's going to work for us. So that drives me a lot, right? I have a standard, and a standard is an unbreakable. You never compromise on it. There's no reason to ever break it. I don't raise my voice with my kids. I don't raise my voice with my wife. I don't lose my temper ever. You can ask my wife and kids. I'm not saying that I've always been that way, but in the past 4+ years, that's been the standard for me, because I just realized I can't sit there and say I want these things and then not be able to live to a standard. Is it easy? No. Are there some practical things that I have to do to make sure that I hold that standard? For sure there are. But I will tell you that, like anything, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And that to me is self-leadership, because I have a clear picture of what I want. And clarity really is power.
Yeah. And so I want to devil's advocate, kind of ask a question off that. For someone, and you even kind of just mentioned, like, man, I haven't always been that.
For sure.
I wasn't always that. For someone listening, like, holy guacamole,
Right.
this is like drinking from a water hose.
Yeah.
How would you encourage someone to pursue maybe a community or group?
For sure.
I know you guys even have some additional coaching. I'm not even trying to plug that.
Yeah.
But please do, if it can add value.
Yeah.
Just like, man, I just even maybe need some coaching,
Yeah.
kind of like Garrett did for you. Like, how can I get to that navigating funnel to get to that self-leadership for myself?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no two ways about it. It takes work, man.
Yeah.
Like but like you have to. We are trained in society to want things quick and easy, and I think I could go down that road. And I'm not trying to sound like the old guy, like an old man talking about like, oh, microwave society, but it's actually true.
Yeah.
And the analogy I always use is there's principles. Principles govern outcomes. And what I mean by that is principles, you see principles in patterns. If you understand the principles, you know how to generate outcomes. The problem is that we sail by principles all the time. If you're talking about growth, which is what you're talking about, like right now, I lose my temper all the time. I want to grow into being a man that doesn't ever lose his temper. Well, the principles of growth are repetition, consistency, which is like how much, and time. Oh man, time. Shoot. Yeah. And the consistency matters, right? You can't violate any of those principles and expect to have growth. I use the example of a tree. If you want to grow an oak tree and you knew exactly how much light it took and exactly how many nutrients and all the stuff and how much water, you plant that little acorn, you pour all the stuff on it, guess what you did? You just killed it. You killed the seed, right? If you set up heat lamps and all that sort of stuff, because time and in this case, consistency as well, they're principles. You have to do the right things in the right amount for a period of time. Sometimes you don't know how long in order to get the results. Yeah. So my encouragement would be don't have to have it right now, and don't ask yourself like what you think you could do for the next 3 months or 3 years. What could you do that you'd never have to stop?
Yeah.
Like what are the little consistencies that you could do every single day, no matter what, that over time would compound and become so great that you would look back and be like, man, look how far I've come. And at that point, nobody could shortcut their way to what you have, because you have so much compounding and so much growth and repetition in there that like at that point you're a different person.
Yeah.
And so you're going to fail. You're going to try and do things, and you're going to have to pick yourself back up. But it's like, what are you willing to do for forever? Because we quit on things, like I said earlier in this podcast, all the time. And if you can have the mindset that like, I'm going to turn up every single day, I'm going to do the right things forever. And if I'm doing this, and this, and I'm not getting the results I want, rather than being upset or discouraged or tried my best and quitting, I'm going to say, well, there must be a this I'm missing. And then if I had to, what would it take? Okay. So yes, we do coaching. We have a our mindset mastery program where we literally teach people a lot of these. I'm touching on a lot of different tools and skills that we actually teach people how to use. We have 2 live calls. You have on-demand access to all this information, and we have a good program for how it actually administers it to you, so that you can learn it. And I also do personal coaching, but you can find out all that at theimpossible.life. That's our website. Cool. So that's where you can find out everything about me and Garrett and what we do.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Man, I'm fired up.
Good, man. Yeah.
I'm ready, need to go throw down for a workout or something.
Let's go. Yeah, man. This is our life, man. It's a great thing to be able to wake up every morning, and like our saying on the podcast is today matters. Yeah. And what that is that's an urgency statement. It's I spent a lot of my life on like a 5 and 2 time frame orientation, which what I mean is spent 5 days working so I could do 2 days of what I wanted, and it all started over again. Man, and it was just like, oh, I got to get to Friday, right? And that's how we live by default. Whereas today matters is like there's no 5 and then 2 or whatever your time frame may be. It's like, no, this day, the one that I have right now, sat across from Michael having this conversation. This is an important conversation. Well, how do you know? I've decided it to be so because I believe that God's going to use whatever we're doing. There might be somebody out there that needs to hear something that we said that is going to ignite a spark in them. That's what I believe whenever I do things. Is like I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm going to trust that whatever needs to happen, that God is going to use it because, like I said, I don't have to make purpose come about. I just have to honor him, be faithful to what he's given, and glorify him, seek to glorify God, which glorify means to reveal him. So I want to reveal God in how I do everything, which means if I'm working, I'm going to work and do everything to the max of my ability. Even if I hate it, I'm going to give everything I got, right? And I'm going to do it with a good attitude. I'm going to encourage other people, and I'm going to seek to just do right by people regardless of what they do to me. And I'm going to trust that God's going to use all that and put his super on my natural. And you know what? I got to say, so far, it's worked out pretty well. Yeah. God is faithful.
Let's go.
Yeah, man.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Well, man, you touched a little bit on where we could find you, theimpossible.life.
Yeah, that's our website, theimpossible.life. Yeah.
Platforms, if you want to share those. And then I would love to just end on and conclude on just what are some of the impossible things that you guys are pursuing, you and Garrett. But so, where can we find you? The podcast,
all right,
social media, all of it.
Yeah, so you can find us at The Impossible Life on everything. Okay. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. We've got a Patreon, if you know what that is. Like I said, the website's theimpossible.life. You can just search The Impossible Life on literally any podcast app, and we're there. Cool. So yeah, that's how you get a hold of us.
Awesome.
And I'm at NickSurface1 on Instagram if you want to follow me. So there you go.
Garrett's
at Garrett Unkelbach. He would tell you that. He gives me a grief because mine is Nick Surface 1. He's like, I killed all the other Garrett Unkelbachs.
Which come from a SEAL,
like, from a Navy SEAL, you could say that.
He maybe did. I don't know.
Yeah, no. Well, I always give him grief. He has a very unique last name, shall we say? So I don't think there's that many Garrett Unkelbachs.
Very true. Yeah. Well, man, and then lastly, what are some of y'all's impossible kind of pursuits that y'all are doing?
Yeah,
like business, personal, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we've run 100-milers together and stuff like that, and we've done some fun things. We climb mountains. We do something difficult every year together, which is a lot of fun. We lead the men's ministry at Elevate Life Church, where there's over 400 men. If you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, come see us. We're on Teal and Main in Frisco, and we meet every Saturday morning at 7 a.m. You can come be with 400 other dudes. I promise you, you will not have ever experienced anything like this. And that sounds like, okay, whatever. But I'm telling you, man, I've lived in the UK. I've lived on the East Coast. I've lived on the West Coast. Now I live in Dallas. And before I went there, it wasn't just that I'd never experienced a room like that. I'd never even known anybody who had been to a men's group like that. It is truly unique. And I feel very honored to be able to be one of the leaders in that room. So I'll just say, come see us if you're in the area. Because I'd love to meet people and just get men plugged in. Because the vision for The Impossible Life, and very much the vision for my own life and the mission that I'm on, is I want to see men be men the way God intended them to be. Like our vision, truly the most impossible thing that we're pursuing is to shift the perception of what it means to be a godly man. Okay, that sounds great. What does that actually mean? Well, I don't think godly men right now. I think what the world is waiting to see is a truly transformed man. Like a man that actually pursues God and reflects him with every single thing that he's got in all areas of his life. I think what we've become what's very normal is a guy, and if this is you, I'm not beating you up because I've been there as well, but it's the guy that's like, oh, I love Jesus, and then like 5 minutes later, that same dude's like trying to screw someone over on a business deal, or he's got a busted up marriage, or his family's falling apart, and it's not that we have to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
Like, I'm very real about all this stuff. I've had a not functioning marriage. I'm not throwing stones from my glass house by any stretch of the imagination, but what I believe is that God has given us his word, he's given us his spirit, and he's given us each other so that we can know him, know his ways, and truly be his people in the earth. And what his people in the earth are here to do is to display what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to be a follower of God. And that means that, like, in all your ways, like I said, you're glorifying him, you're revealing his nature. And when you do things God's way, it works, man. And so, like, our perception is that we see more men raise up to be honoring, loving, serving, protectors, providers, and leaders, that for themselves, for their family, for their communities, and for the church. That's really what we want to see, is that men would be restored to that, and that they would understand what that means. It's not a toxic masculinity like, oh, we're here to dominate.
Yeah.
It's no, we're here to serve in the way that we're here to lead in the way that Jesus said, which is servant leadership, which is actually how many people are you lifting up, not how many people are under you. Yeah. And so it's that is really what we're giving our life to. Like, I will be doing this until the day there's no longer breath in my lungs, man. And I really mean that, is just to try and with everything that I got, and just trusting that God's going to put his super on our natural to just pursue that, and to pursue seeing men transform so that they can know God and truly live their lives knowing him, because it all flows from there.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Man, I really appreciate you being here
Yeah.
and jumping on with me,
Yeah.
especially just at the just freaking throw of like, hey, we just met passing,
Yeah.
going to get a barber cut, and
Yeah.
then now we're here. So again, even just aligning of like, man, I think that was nothing but God's
For sure.
intervention.
Yeah.
and
Well, I'm honored to be
connection.
here, man. Thank you for having
So
me.
yeah, thank you for just being humble to come on, and even me listening, jumping into listening to some of y'all's episodes. They've really given me some fruit and some positivity and
Good.
encouragement. And so I'm excited to continue to even dive more into those
Yeah.
episodes. But thank you so much for joining us. Any last things that you got?
No, man, I'm just grateful
Yeah.
to be here, man. It's a good conversation. Enjoyed it.
Well, dude, thank you so much, guys. This is the end of this episode with Nick Surface. Make sure you guys go check them out, The Impossible Life. And if you want to get around some awesome dudes and some great men pursuing the Lord, go over on Saturday.
Yes.
What time? At
7
Elevation?
a.m.
7 a.m.
You don't have anything to do at 7 a.m.
Get up out of
Get
bed.
up.
That's what you got to do.
I mean, come on. That's not even early. Let's
Yeah.
go.
You're
Yeah.
right. It was 4:30. Okay. But yeah, so 7 a.m. Saturday mornings. Nick will be there. And thank you
So
guys
will
for
Garrett.
listening.
Yeah.
Yep. See you guys later.